Retro.
What's up, guys? This is Daniel Logan, Boba Fett from Attack of the Clones, The Clone Wars, Book of Boba, Skywalker Saga game, and hopefully many more things in the Star Wars galaxy. You are listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Yep, this is the way I've spoken.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are starting off the week with the next episode in our The Clone Wars rewatch, which is Legacy of Terror. Jay, you want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are before we start talking about that?
Absolutely. So we are very conveniently found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So, as I just said, this will be our discussion of Legacy of Terror, which is episode 7 from season 2 of the Clone Wars. Full spoiler discussion, so if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's fun. Jay, you want to go ahead and give us the summary for the episode, please?
Sure thing. With the fall of the droid foundries, the Republic and the Jedi have effectively conquered Geonosis. One thing remains, hunting down Poggle the Lesser. Master Luminara takes on this task and pursues the Separatist leader into a sandstorm. Just when she thought she had caught up with him in an abandoned temple, he disappears. Suddenly, Luminara goes missing as well. After the sandstorm, Anakin and Obi-Wan go looking for her and discover the Geonosian queen, who is capable of creating a powerful hive mind with worm-like creatures that enables her to control her soldiers even in death. When negotiations with the Queen fail, Anakin and Obi-Wan successfully rescue Luminara and take Poggle into custody before the Queen can take control of Luminara.
Right. So this is a very different type of episode of the Clone Wars.
Yes,
it is the horror episode when it comes down to it, and it pays homage to all kinds of zombie-like movies, and I definitely got Aliens type vibes from some of the scenes here, especially the Geonosians like crawling across the ceiling and the like there. What did you think about this one overall?
Well, we were talking just briefly right before we got started about the creepy factor in this one. So, last episode had a little bit of creepiness. This one had a lot of creepiness, but it also had some good humor, awesome action, and, some real kind of like edge of your seat sorts of things that, jump scares and whatnot that really made it a lot of fun and just a lot of, just like I said, a lot of action and whatnot. So it was really cool. I really enjoyed this episode. And I must admit, I laughed out loud a couple times. We'll get to that. But what do you think?
So this is the third episode in a 4-episode arc that started with landing at Point Rain, and then we had the weapons factory episode where the droid factory is what it really was that Ahsoka and Barriss Offee had to destroy. Now you got this one, and so when I say this is, if I was ranking them, this is the third best of the 3 for me. That may sound like it's a put down, but it's really not. I mean, these are all really good episodes. They're a lot of fun. This is not going to be in my top 5, top 10 episodes. I think Landing at Point Rain is really hard to beat, and that'd be my favorite from the story arc.
It's a classic.
But this is a different type of Star Wars, and I think this episode is one of the things that George Lucas hoped to accomplish with the Clone Wars, was to be able to tell the story of the Clone Wars, that took place between the Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, but to tell other types of Star Wars stories along the way. We've had the political intrigue, heist, spy type episode that Padme stole the droid foundry plans at, and we've had the hostage crisis type episodes. We've had major battle episodes like Landing at Point Rain, and so now we get a horror type episode here. And so that's cool that this series could be a vehicle for George Lucas to do these different type of things when it comes down to it. The thing is that he keeps promoting Star Wars as being aimed at 12-year-olds in general. And I suppose most 12-year-olds would be able to take this episode without causing nightmares. But I'm trying to think back if this is one that I showed to my kids because they were really little back in the day. And I typically saw these before I let them watch them. How about you? Would this be something you would have shown to a younger kid?
Well, I was trying to think about that myself actually while I was rewatching this, and I was thinking, okay, did my kids watch this the first time around? And I think that they may have been too young when it first came out, but I mean, if they did, I don't think it stuck with them, at all. But now that
Mhm.
I'm watching it again, I'm thinking to myself, gosh, did I really let my kids watch this?
Mhm.
I mean, it's straight up nightmare fuel, in some
Yeah.
instances. Like I said, there's definitely some good humor, but I mean, yeah, in hindsight, it's like, ooh, wow, did we really watch this? I don't
Yeah. More,
remember, quite
more
honestly.
specifically, it is the zombie Geonosians that are they're already creepy to begin with, but then you make them zombies with these worms crawling in and out of their noses, and then the threat of shoving one of these worms up Luminara's nose later in the
Yeah.
episode here. And so again, I'm gonna have to talk to my wife a little bit later and see if she remembers whether we watched this one or not with the kids. But it's just like, wow, for something that really was, it's an all audiences series for the most part. But again, and this stuff showed up in the toy section for kids all the time.
Sure.
And so you would think that any given episode would be just fine to show them. But anyway, this is one I would definitely use some discretion before I showed it to younger children, for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah.
And
I'm gonna have to
I'm
ask
really
Colby
hoping
if
I
he
did so.
remembers. Yeah, right? I know it's like, okay, parenting at its best here. But
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go, like, I don't know if you heard me, but I'll have to go back and ask Colby one if he remembers seeing this as a kid. So I'll
Yeah.
I'll report back.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, a lot of things going on in this. It starts off with what we are kind of talking about in the summary here, that Geonosis has effectively been conquered. Well, I guess the better way to put it is that the Jedi and the Republic have control of the planet. And now it's a matter of just kind of tying up loose pockets of resistance from the Geonosians, hunting down Poggle the Lesser and the like. And we get this conversation between Ki-Adi-Mundi and Luminar, and it comes up a couple different times. And I think even with Obi-Wan here about the toll that this invasion took, how many lives were lost in this. And so it's kind of one, this notion that the Jedi aren't just recklessly throwing away the lives of the clones, that they
Mhm.
appreciate that the fact that a lot of their soldiers died for this, and it cost a lot of Geonosians their lives. That they're
Right.
not just taking into account their own clones, and two, that these are some of the early seeds of doubt that are we doing the right thing by engaging in this war. They don't come out and have that conversation, but it kind of came across to me as like a nagging doubt that was starting with them. But what do you think?
Yeah, oh, definitely. And, I think that a lot of it is that they've been dealing with them so much that it's been kind of almost, I don't want to say commonplace, but they're more of a pest than anything. And they don't
Hmm.
really see them as necessarily, not that they don't see them a um a people, so to speak,
Hmm.
but they're just more of a nuisance,
Right.
you know?
Right. Yeah, but I did kind of appreciate that this is in a show like this, that they're taking, and they didn't have to spend a whole, I think it was they didn't have to spend a whole lot of time on it. I think they spent the right amount of time on it, which is, let's pause for a second and reflect on this. It
Mhm.
was, this is a war. It cost a lot. This was a
Mhm.
hard earned victory. It didn't come cheap. And then, and part of that is that we see Ki Monday, and he was headed off to get medical attention the last time we saw him. And they marked that,
Mhm.
we marked that he's up and about earlier than they thought. And then basically he says that, after spending that much time in a back to tank, looking at holo images is a real nice reprieve from all of that. So we get Tim back in this episode as well.
So I have to ask real
Mhm.
quickly, that little teeny tiny line right there made me think about the book. Was it Tales of not Tales of the Jedi, the one that we just reviewed last summer, where it went into a lot more of the Jedi Council and some of the adventures that they were having here, there, and everywhere. And he was one of the characters that was kind of dove into just a little bit more. Do you remember what book I'm talking about? I cannot think of the name of that book. But at any rate, it reminded me of, how his character was represented in that book, more almost carefree, and just that one little comment that he made about the back to tank just made me
Mhm.
think about that.
You talking
So,
about John Jackson Miller's book?
thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you know what I'm talking about though with the way his character was in that book? He
Yeah,
just seemed so
yeah.
lighthearted, and it
The
just
Living
brought me
Force,
back.
that's the
The
name of the book.
Living Force, that's what it was, not Tales of the Jedi. I think that was a comic book.
Right. Yeah, it was Tales of the Jedi was both a Legends book, and then I think they had some comics as well. But
There we go.
The Living Force was that Phantom Menace prequel that
Yes,
came
yes.
out and stuff like that. Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah,
that was a
yeah.
squirrel moment on my part,
Right.
but
No. I hear you because yeah, it's really the last significant time we talked about Key on Monday that I can think of.
right,
So
yeah.
yeah, makes sense. All right. Well, there's a fun bit on the featurette on StarWars.com for this episode, and it's Dave Filoni talking about the sandstorm. And originally, this was not in the script for this episode, but when they started to edit the whole thing together, they kind of ran into some narrative problems with, which is why didn't Anakin and Obi-Wan just go out to help Luminara in the first place? Well, enter the sandstorm. That made it impossible for them to go out and help her, so
Mhm.
she could get lost in that. And but then there was Dave dove into discussion of the details about how it sounds different when you're out in it, and they had to develop goggles for the animation for Luminar to wear while she's on her bark
Yeah,
speeder there, and then how it sounds different inside is kind of haunting and the like. And in its way, the sandstorm was a character, and that it could influence the scenes. So interesting little tidbit there. But
for
for
sure.
me, one of the best scenes in this whole sandstorm is you got Pog the Lesser inside a droid tank hauling some munitions crates, and he's got a line of battle droids marching behind him, and they are clearly starting to power down. And they'll do this again in a later episode, only it'll be General Grievous in Pog the Lesser's position. As the droids start to run out of power and fall behind, he just gleefully leaves them there. And we get this one who gets swept away in the sandstorm and just loses power, and his bright port shuts down. It's like, don't leave me here.
Yes.
But just the callousness, that the way Poggle treats the battle droids, who are the counterparts to the clone troopers that the
Mhm.
Jedi are actually trying to take care of, was a
So
neat little
true.
juxtaposition in this episode.
Yeah, it is indeed, and, to your point too, one of the things when I was speaking about the humor, as much as it is kind of morbid humor in a way, but you get that one battle droid that, they're going through the sandstorm, and I can't remember what his call sign was, but he says,
Mm-hmm.
"Are you still there?" He says, "I'm right next to you, I
Mm-hmm.
think." And then the next thing you know, he like you said, "Don't leave me." So
Yep.
that was interesting. And then when Luminara and her droid captain go
Clone
over that,
Captain.
you can see her clone yes, thank you, clone captain go over that, you can see him already being overcome by the sand and just this
Mm-hmm.
relic that's gonna end up being, like a
They
crate dragon kind of thing in the sand.
they didn't even see him. They just went
No,
right
they didn't
over
even
him
see him, but the
because they're
camera sees him.
yeah, because they make that remark that they can't see, so they're just going the same
Right.
direction that they know Poggle was going, and eventually
Mhm.
they end up at that temple. Okay, so they get to the temple, and we get a little classic horror motif here with, they can't find Poggle the Lesser here. They don't know where he went. The clone captain kicks open the seal to further down in the temple, and I don't remember if they said this during the episode, but you can find it on the episode guide. This is a temple that was actually destroyed in the bombing that happened during the invasion or the previous
Oh,
invasion here. So,
okay.
anyways, they're that. And then all of a sudden, Luminara contacts Obi-Wan and Anakin, and while she's having the conversation, she gets kidnapped. And they accomplish two things there. One, it's a classic horror trope there, all talking on a phone or something like that, and then all of a sudden the line goes dead. The person's been
Yeah.
kidnapped. But it also reminded me of when Obi-Wan was on Geonosis during the Attack of the Clones, and he had contacted the Jedi Council only to get apprehended by the battle droids from the Foundry that he was
Oh,
investigating.
good call. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
they brought that back as well.
Yeah, some nice mirroring there.
But eventually we get the reveal of Queen Karina the Great, the Geonosian queen. Basically, a being about the size of a regular Geonosian mounted on top of a very, very gigantic egg sack in her
Yes.
chamber. Oh, what'd you think of Karina?
Yes. Well, what I thought was really interesting was that they didn't actually know that a queen truly existed
Mm-hmm.
because they'd only ever heard rumors. But it's like, well, where did you think all of them were coming from then?
Right.
Kind of thing. I mean, if they are a hive, then there's got to be a queen somewhere. But she is your I hate to say like typical kind of thing, but it reminded me, again, like Solo Star Wars story with the worms and, all of that kind of stuff. And just they were showing all the little pupas
Mm-hmm.
being, extracted. And it was like, I don't know if we necessarily needed to see the physical representation of them, like eggs being laid kind of thing. But again, I think that did kind of add to that cringy, creepy kind of level of things. And the fact that she was, though, able to speak basic, I thought was very interesting because the rest of the Geonosians, I mean, you think about Pago the Lesser and he's just doing his clicking and clacking, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
then you've got Karina, who is, even though her basic is not perfect and she's like, rah, 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 she's still speaking basic.
Mm-hmm.
So that I thought was an interesting kind of touch. So I don't know if that was just basically to show her, you know, omnipresence in the grand scheme of things, or if it was just for convenience. But, anyways, those are my thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, she kind of reminded me of the queen in Aliens. It was a gigantic alien attached to a huge egg sack
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
was laying eggs there. But once the queen got away from her egg sack, she proved to be really, really deadly, which I'm not sure this Geonosian queen would have been. But regardless, to your comment about her being able to speak basic, I wondered if she didn't pick that up from bringing some other being that spoke basic into the hive mind at some point.
Ah,
Pure speculation on my point, because we know she can control people by using these worms, which I gotta confess I don't entirely understand. Were the worms somehow, because the worms are not the Geonosians. The worms are something different. Is she got a symbiont relationship with them, or how does this work? Is a thing, and that's what Obi-Wan wanted to know. He wanted to figure out how
yeah.
this worked, and poor Luminara was the victim in all this. She'd been captured inside the catacombs, and and Obi-Wan is standing there with Anakin and a bunch of the clones, and they're getting ready to hatch open one of these egg type things that's got a worm in it and then infect Luminara. And Obi-Wan's like, do you think it'll enter through the nose or the ears? And Anakin's like,
Yeah.
pretty sure, I don't think she wants to find out. And then this is the comedic part of the episode, as gruesome as it
Hmm.
was, it was like, no, I really don't. Don't want to
Right.
find out about this. And so, they get into the fight, and Obi-Wan captures one of these worms, but Anakin doesn't understand that he purposely picked it up and is like, watch out, Obi-Wan. And he smacks it out of his hand and he smashes under his boot, and Obi-Wan protests, I wanted to study that. Study the bottom of my boot.
Right.
So
That's what
another good
cracked me
line.
up too.
Yeah, there. But yeah, do you have any speculation on the Geonosians and the worms and how this hive mind works?
Well, what I thought, I picked up on was how Karina said, I've had one in the past, but now you've brought me three. So it does make me wonder if, as you said, that there was potentially another Jedi that, because she said specifically, I had one. I don't
Okay,
think
that's an
that
interesting
she was
interpretation of that
referring,
line.
yeah, because I didn't think she was referring to Luminara.
You see, I thought she was. I thought she said she had one, and now she's going to have three because they showed
Hmm.
up.
Yeah, and
But
maybe
I'd
I
have to go
was
back and look at that.
misinterpreting that. So I didn't
Right.
know if maybe she had, used it, maybe not necessarily on a Jedi, but at least, as you said, to be able to speak basic. That's how she was
Mhm.
able to, to do that. But I don't know. I mean, the only thing that I can think of is that these worms must be somehow, native to Geonosis somewhere, I mean, could they have been possibly bioengineered by the Geonosians? Sure,
Yeah.
and then used by Karina to do her bidding and to be able to have these, zombie type, uh, drone basically kind of things that were able to work for her. But yeah, very, very creepy indeed. And so the fact that she specifically wanted a Jedi, though, I mean, that she made it clear that that's what she was looking for,
Hmm.
is very interesting to me.
Oh yeah,
Be-
yeah. She could have
Because,
infiltrated the Republic. She could have done all
right.
kinds of stuff with that. Infiltrated the
So,
Jedi and sabotage things and freed her planet potentially with all of that.
right,
And
right.
the next
So,
episode goes into that quite a bit more, which will be fun to
yeah.
discuss.
Definitely. So I was
Mm.
thinking, I don't know, was she trying to tap into the Force by specifically wanting a Jedi and thinking that these worms could potentially, hardwire her into the Force in that way?
That's an interesting thought. I hmm.
Because why else
Yeah,
would she specifically want a Jedi if she could have used a clone? You know what I mean? Because the clones are
well,
attached to the Republic, but the Jedi are generals. I
sure.
get that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to it. I don't know that she necessarily expected to get force powers herself, but there's things she's going to be able to do with a Jedi that she was not going to be able to do otherwise. I mean, spoiler for the next episode, Barra Safi gets infected with one of these things.
Right.
And I don't know that we're aware of any force sensitive Geonosian queens as a result of it. Um, so to me, I think it is a matter of, this is kind of a trope, that we've seen in science fiction and various places where some sort of alien species infects various officers, and then they use that to infiltrate. It happens in Star Trek a couple times. Whether it's the changelings just posing as Starfleet officers or another alien species taking over certain officers so they can infiltrate and then take things over, and various degrees of success on there.
Mhm.
And I can think of a few other series that have done that as well. And so, I think it was a matter of be able to position to gain spies, to be able to uh, gain influence, to cause havoc, is probably what she was going for there. And yes, a clone is better than nothing, but a Jedi is far better than a clone with the
Mhm.
reach that you could obtain with that.
True. So true.
So, okay, well then, the episode concludes with the clones bringing down the house on the Geonosians. There, they take out some supports and collapse the cave. The queen gets buried under a bunch of rubble and debris, and then the air forces all the dust into a geyser that pushes them up out of an air shaft, and so they get away and they're safe. One of the things that we've talked about on a previous podcast that we did, um, Starship Savers and Scoundrels, was Death Troopers, and it just so happens this episode came out at the same year that novel did. Um,
Mm.
but they make sure to point out in the trivia guide for this that these two projects were developed independently. And I don't know, I just find it kind of cool that was what was on people's mind that year
Right.
with Star
Yeah.
Wars. Zombies was the thing. Geonosian zombies, and then Stormtrooper zombies and the like, in the Death Troopers novels there. But that was a good year for Star Wars horror when it came down to it.
Yeah, I guess so. And what year would that have been? Would that have been like 2012, somewhere in there?
I think it was 2009.
Okay, so a little earlier than that. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. I wonder what was really, popular at the time with like would Walking Dead, be super popular? I bet it probably was kind of thing, like with
Yeah,
the whole
I
zombie thing.
yeah, I'm not sure what zombie projects would have been out at the
Mhm.
time. Because Walking Dead, I believe, was a comic before it was a show, so maybe that was
Right.
an influence there.
Mhm.
Um, but but yeah. So I mean, just getting back to this though, I mean, it's a fun episode. It's unique compared to anything that we'd seen on screen in Star Wars before. The zombie Geonosians were well done, I think, in that you couldn't just shoot them because
Yeah.
they were already dead. As what they pointed out, you really had to hack them apart with a lightsaber, and that's what we're used to from zombies. You can't just stab them and think that'll do it. You have to take off their heads. You have to, take them out at the kneecaps, to be blunt
Right.
about it here. And
So
that's what they had to do with
Yep.
the zombie Geonosians here. And it was a well done episode for what it was. And like I said, not going to be one of my favorite episodes ever, but I can't deny that it was a good one.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and it's a classic, just again borrowing from straight up horror,
Mm-hmm.
tapping into some primal fears, not just like death, but losing control of your mind and your body, which is definitely terrifying.
Yep. And we get to revisit this all again next week.
Yes,
So
we
make sure you all
do.
come back next Monday for that episode of our Clone Wars rewatch. All right. Well, then I think we'll go ahead and start wrapping up this episode. Thank you all for joining us for this discussion of Legacy of Terror as part of our Clone Wars rewatch. We hope you've enjoyed it. And if you haven't done so already, hey, hit that subscribe button and you'll get all of our upcoming rewatch episodes from the Clone Wars. We're going to take a break here pretty soon from doing this, as we'll be getting into Andor and Tales of the Underworld and the next season of the Industrial Light and Magic series that's coming out. There's a lot to cover in May, Jay. We're going to be so busy.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So good. Good
But we
podcast.
will be getting back to this rewatch once we've covered those things. So probably into May, early June would be my guess. But you can also look in our back catalog for all the episodes we've done on the Clone Wars, and we've covered some episodes out of order when we were discussing other topics. So be on the lookout for that. Other place you can find the show would be retrozap.com, which has got all of the episodes in our catalog, previous 872, which is going to be more than like the 200 that show up on Apple Podcasts and the like. So if you're looking for some older stuff there, that would be a great place to do it. Jay, you want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found online?
Absolutely. So we are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And you don't have to be scared to go to our Pinterest boards either, because there's all kinds of fun things to check out over there. And you can also hit us up on our two YouTube outlets, which include the regular traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and share those out. And if you've seen this episode of the Clone Wars, which hopefully you have if you've been listening to this review, let us know what your thoughts are on the Geonosian Queen and the zombie Geonosians and all of the things that we've discussed. So we also have a way to support the show, and that is through purchasing something through TeePublic. So you can find that link in our show notes. And we do have 7 different show logo designs on all kinds of fun things, from home goods to apparel and everything in between.
All right. You want to remind everybody what you got going on in cosplay?
Sure. So you can always find me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I do have a few things coming up here in May that I'll be able to give some more details about very, very soon. But until then, you can find me as Ahsoka, the Fourth Sister, 2 different versions of Hera, as well as my original concept Mandalorian based on Tahiri Vela from Legends. We were kind of talking about Legends here and there, and a lot of other things as well. So again, that is at j.snipscosplay.
All right. Coming up on the show this Wednesday, this is going to be fun. We're talking about the Star Wars fan film Troops in the next edition of our Laugh It Up Fuzzball series. And then on Friday, we end the week with some Star Wars news. But with that, just want to say thanks for listening to episode 873 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be